Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, absurdism in the extreme. It's all available here in the Tales from the Omni Vault book series. Check the description for Amazon links so you can get your copies and start reading today. Thank you all, and now, on to the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni Viewer, and this particular author's take on video is in response to a live stream that happened on a different channel, the channel Sea Monster Essays. You might have actually seen Sea Monster's videos pop up in different One Monstrous Moment events. This particular live stream was about Godzilla Final Wars. I tuned in for a little bit of it, but I couldn't stick around for the whole thing because I had to prepare for my own live stream that same evening. But I did tune in just at the right moment where one of my other guests, Sea Animus, who was on this live stream and is frequently on Sea Monster live streams, basically stated that he just couldn't fathom the idea of turning your brain off. You probably know what he's referring to, right? The idea that there are some pieces of entertainment where you're just supposed to turn your brain off, right? You're not supposed to think too hard about it. Just sit back and enjoy the ride. But he stated that he just can't wrap his head around that because I think one of the ways he put it is that he tried putting his brain on the seat next to him, but as he was watching the movie, it crawled back in and he started questioning things. And that actually got me thinking, because, like, I'm an advocate of escapism. I'm an advocate of the idea that there are some different pieces of entertainment where you could describe it as turning your brain off. But how does that actually work? How do I actually justify that sort of thing and not have it come across like it's some kind of an excuse? So I've been thinking about it, and I think I've arrived at an answer. I don't necessarily know if it's the answer. In fact, I recognize that I could very well be way off base with this, but having put some thought to it, it's what makes sense to me. So I'm going to put it forward now. To start things off, we need to reference two very different sequences from popular culture. You can either just picture these in your mind's eye if you're familiar with them, or if you need a refresher / don't know them, you can open a new tab and look them up. The first sequence I want you all to bear in mind is the my sister, my daughter scene from towards the end of Roman Polanski's Chinatown. Yes, I know what Roman Polanski did, but I'm bringing the movie up for a reason. Trust me on this. That sequence, when you watch it, either on its own or in context of the greater film, you can tell what kind of scene it's supposed to be. This is a scene in which one character is interrogating another, and in order to get a straight answer out of her, because she keeps waffling back and forth, he, at this point, has had enough with all the deception and the doublespeak and everything, so now he's just smacking her across the face every time she changes her answer, until she finally breaks down and reveals the shocking truth. Everything about this scene screams dramatic, from the performances that the two actors give, particularly where that poor woman just finds it harder and harder to keep her composure and to keep her deep, dark secret as the scene continues. The way the camera just holds on that moment, forcing you to watch this interrogation take place and devolve to a point where physical violence is being implemented. The way in which each slap hits, the shocking revelation at the end. You might even find a little part of your brain thinking, wait a minute, a gentleman is never supposed to hit a lady. So no matter how you approach it, this scene is meant to be very disturbing, very shocking, possibly even get you to the point of tears at the end of it. It is a very well-known scene in that regard. Okay, so now that we've got that in mind, the next sequence we're going to visit is the Niagara Falls routine from the Three Stooges. That should be easy to find. It's one of their most popular routines. And it's basically one of the ones where they're not necessarily as a group, they're just playing out three different characters who happen to be in the same place at the same time. Two of them have a history, one of them gets caught in the middle of it. It's a classic. And again, because it's the Three Stooges, physical violence of the slapstick variety gets involved. However, the Niagara Falls routine is meant to be comedic. How do we know it's comedic, you may ask? Well, I know you're never supposed to explain the joke, but I kind of have to. So first of all, we can tell that the way Moe, Larry, and Curly are performing is meant to be dramatic, but it's an over-the-top kind of drama. Melodrama, if you will. It's pushing the dramatic stuff just far enough that you can tell it's getting a little ridiculous. And then, of course, when it gets to the slapstick, we can tell that's meant to be funny through a number of audio-visual cues. The way in which each blow is delivered, combined with how Curly reacts to them, the completely unrealistic sound effects, the fact that after he's done getting the tar beaten out of him, Curly just kind of gets up, brushes himself off, and is like, well, that was annoying, as opposed to acting in severe pain. It all comes together in a way that we can tell it is meant to be funny, as opposed to the scene in Chinatown where a woman constantly takes 5 across the eyes in an interrogation, and we're not meant to be laughing. Now the thing is, our brains recognize those two different tones, and they adjust automatically. It's not even conscious. We know that we're supposed to watch a drama with a particular mindset and watch a comedy with a completely different kind of mindset, and we just automatically make that adjustment. We know we're not supposed to laugh at the Chinatown scene, but we are supposed to laugh at the Niagara Falls routine. Now that's why I brought it up, because this is bringing us towards the idea of what it means to have a piece of entertainment where you turn your brain off. The fact of the matter is, I think the term is a bit of an oversimplification, as so many such terms tend to be. It is almost impossible for there to be a piece of art where you are meant to completely shut off your brain, like not think about it at all. Now, there might be pieces of art that don't inspire you to think at all, like when they just glue a bunch of garbage together and say, look at my sculpture, and you're just like, no, that's a pile of garbage, I'm not going to bother with it. But when we're talking about actual pieces of art, actual pieces of entertainment, you're never meant to completely shut your brain off. What you're doing instead is shutting off certain parts of your brain. And I don't mean that literally. I mean you're adjusting your way of thinking so that you have the proper mindset going in. And anything that might affect that mindset, you're deliberately setting aside. Like I said, with these two contrasting scenes, we know that when a person gets slapped across the face, it hurts. And when you combine that with the overall story of Chinatown, that makes the scene of the my sister, my daughter interrogation all the more unpleasant to watch, deliberately so. But with the Niagara Falls routine, we can tell from all the different cues that no one's actually getting hurt, and it's all just meant to be in good fun. So the parts of our mind that knows how much it hurts to get poked in the eye or smacked across the face or punched until you fall on the ground, that just gets put aside. You're not supposed to be thinking about that when you're watching The Three Stooges. You turn that part of your brain off and you watch the scene the way it was meant to be taken. Now some of you might be thinking, well, okay, Omni, I see what you're driving at with that, but you're contrasting a drama with a comedy. There are plenty of works, like this original live stream, like I said, is about Godzilla Final Wars, which has its comedic moments, but it's not a comedy. It's meant to be taken more seriously, and how are you supposed to turn your brain off with that? Well, it's true, there are pieces of entertainment that are meant to be taken seriously, but still have this whole mindset of no mindset applied to them by people who enjoy them. And I think in some ways you gotta, once again, pay attention to the different audio-visual clues, the different tonal clues, and figure out what it is you're actually experiencing. Let's take Star Wars, for example. In Star Wars, one of the most iconic things, I realize saying an iconic thing from Star Wars is casting a very wide net, but like everybody loves a lightsaber, right? That's like the weapon of Star Wars. But if you really think about it logically, a lightsaber isn't very practical, nor should it really work. First of all, it's breaking the rule of you never bring a knife to a gunfight. This is a weapon that can only work in close quarters, and sure, you might be fast enough to deflect a bunch of laser bolts, but that's going to get tiring after a while, so you're kind of stuck in one place doing that. Plus, let's really think about the mechanics of how it works, right? This is a weapon that generates intense heat, enough to cut through flesh like it's nothing and melt solid metal by layers, like thick layers. And yet, you can hold it in your hand, your bare hand, without burning it, and the searing beam of light is like that far away from your bare skin. Plus, how exactly do you get a beam of light to stop at a certain point? That makes no sense. So, no matter how you look at it, logically speaking anyway, a lightsaber doesn't make sense. So what? The way Star Wars establishes things is that lightsabers work because they work, and they are the best weapons wielded by the greatest heroes in the galaxy. And you're not supposed to think about how the blade can burn through metal but not burn the owner's hand. And you just kind of have to run with it in that regard. Star Wars has plenty of things that it does want you to think about, but the mechanics of stuff like how lightsabers and all the different Death Star weapons and stuff work, that's not necessarily one of the things it wants you to think about. That's just a visual element. You're just supposed to accept that that is a thing that exists and it functions the way we're told it functions, and then you just run with it. The logical part of your brain that says this is a non-functional, impractical weapon, that part you're just supposed to ignore. And millions upon millions of people all over the world do exactly that. They don't care about the real science that might go into making a lightsaber because they understand that Star Wars, despite the sci-fi aesthetic, is ultimately fantasy. And when it's fantasy, you got plenty of wiggle room for how stuff works. It's essentially just accepting magic. Oh, and in case anyone tries saying, well, maybe the lightsabers work that way because the Jedi are using the Force to prevent themselves from getting burned or something, bear in mind, we've seen other people wield lightsabers, even if only briefly, throughout all the different movies. Han Solo, General Grievous, they were not Force sensitive. They were holding lightsabers in their bare hands and having it work the same way. So that's not an answer. The lightsabers only work because they work. So the main point I'm driving at here is that when you hear that a piece of entertainment is the kind where you're just supposed to turn off your brain, that doesn't mean you're supposed to turn off your brain completely. It means you're supposed to adjust your way of thinking and turn off the parts of your brain that would prevent you from accepting the movie on its own terms. And when you get right down to it, that's something that a lot of people do automatically anyway. It's generally not explained all that often, which is why my first reaction to hearing the whole thing about I don't understand how you turn your brain off when you're watching a movie was to think, well, how do I describe that? Because I've never actually consciously thought about it before, because the act itself is unconscious. Now, here's the thing, though. Saying that it's the kind of story where you're just meant to turn your brain off can be used as a deflection of criticism. And it shouldn't be. It's one thing to say that you gotta accept the movie on its own terms when it says that something we know is impossible in the real world works within its own context. And when it says there's a plot hole or there's some ridiculous thing that happens that really doesn't add up no matter how you look at it, but you're not supposed to think about that. It's not a sign of bad writing or anything. Just don't think about it, okay? Because it's not important, we swear. That is not the proper use of this mindset. So for example, that initial live stream was about Godzilla Final Wars. Let's look at that for a particular example. In the world of Godzilla Final Wars, the part of my mind that knows giant monsters can't exist in the real world, at least not like we see them in the movie, that's set aside because that's the context the movie is setting forward. Obviously, I'm going to accept that if I'm watching a Godzilla movie. The idea that mutants exist and use this crazy bullet time, gun kata martial arts nuttiness to fight creatures that are 10 times taller than they are at their shortest, that also is something I can turn my brain off and set aside because it's putting forward that idea of these are a particular breed of superhuman. And, you know, if we have giant monsters, superhumans aren't that much of a stretch to introduce as well. But then we have that whole subplot with Minila, where he appears literally out of nowhere, and yet somehow is also the linchpin of making the finale work. That's not exactly the sort of thing where I can just turn my brain off. I'm naturally going to ask, where did he come from? If he really is Godzilla's literal son, but Godzilla's been frozen in ice for decades, and Minila just happened to appear in this random location when all this crazy stuff was going down, how does that make sense? Does Godzilla even know Minila exists? How long has Minila been there? Did he come from an egg that just hatched, or has it hatched a while ago and he's just been hiding out? Or, see, that's naturally going to raise a question, and if the movie doesn't provide an answer, I'm going to look at that and say, well, I can't just put that aside. I want to know that there has to be some kind of explanation, but none is presented. And again, if somebody responds to that by saying, well, just turn your brain off, that is a deflection. It's essentially the same thing as saying, yes, that is a legitimate criticism because there is no answer presented and we really don't know, but nuts to that. Just ignore it, please. But at the same time, I do think that there are various different kinds of entertainment where you are just going to have to accept it on its own terms, and you just got to recognize, okay, these things are ridiculous, but those are the terms that the story has set forward, and if I can ignore the fact that it doesn't make logical sense, can I accept it? I can't answer that question for other people. I do know that that's how I felt about certain aspects of Godzilla Kong the New Empire, and Godzilla vs. Kong as well. Yes, there are some pretty ridiculous things in there, but I'm of the opinion of, okay, this is clearly a more fantastical kind of Pulp Fiction homage sort of story, so those are the terms it's set forward. I've read plenty of Pulp Fiction, I know what it's like. I'm gonna meet it on those terms and see how it delivers. And it delivers pretty darn well, in my own opinion. But maybe that's just me. Like I said, I really don't know if this is the best possible answer for what it means to turn your brain off when engaging with a piece of entertainment. But having turned my brain on to think about it, I figure this is what makes sense. It's not that you're literally not meant to think about it at all. It's that you gotta be discerning about what you think about it. And you gotta meet a story on its own terms. The story might still not work, granted, but you just kinda have to determine if it's the sort of thing you're meant to think logically about, or if you're just meant to sit back and have fun with it. How do you know the difference? I mean, Heck, that would keep us here even longer. It's the sort of thing that you just kinda know. To quote a Supreme Court justice about a vastly different genre that we do not talk about on this channel, I may not know exactly what defines the kind of entertainment where you are supposed to turn your brain off, but I know an example of it when I see it. Something like the latter-day MonsterVerse movies, or an over-the-top anime like Symphogear, or different examples of pulp fiction by Edgar Rice Burroughs or Robert E. Howard. Those sort of things, you're not meant to completely turn your mind off, but you are supposed to set certain parts of your mind on pause just long enough to enjoy them. Contrast that with something like a hard sci-fi story like 2001: A Space Odyssey or Interstellar, or a mystery novel with Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. There, you're really supposed to be engaging your brain, and you are supposed to be thinking about it logically, so that if something happens that is illogical and doesn't line up, not that anything of the sort happens in those examples, I'm just saying, if something illogical does happen, then it really stands out. And like I said, most of the time the switching off of those different brain portions is automatic anyway, but if the story just isn't working, those parts are going to come back on no matter what. It really is kind of an automatic process. So, I don't know, that's the best that I can explain it at this point, given such short notice and only a little bit of time to think about it. Like I said, maybe I'm completely off base here. I have no idea. We'll see what other people think down in the comments. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.